Welcome to Newsday, reporting live from Singapore. I'm Karishma Vaswani. The headlines. The Taliban flag is raised in the one part of Afghanistan that's remained outside its control. The resistance says it will fight on. Relatives of the 298 people killed when flight MH17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine 7 years ago give harrowing testimony to a court in the Netherlands. Waiting for the chance to eat, concern grows that millions could go hungry as Myanmar edges towards civil war. And countdown to completion. It's one of the biggest restoration projects of a British landmark building. 4 years on, Big Ben has finally got its hands back.
Live from our studio in Singapore. This is BBC News. It's Newsday.
Hello and thanks for joining us. The Taliban say they're now in full control of Afghanistan after seizing the Panjshir Valley, the last area of armed resistance in the country. The Taliban have released a video of their flag being raised in the center of the provincial capital, but the leader of the resistance fighters has called for a national uprising. Our chief international correspondent, Newsday Sept, has the latest from Kabul.
A white flag of victory, the Taliban flag, the centre of the scenic Panjshir Valley. This last redoubt of armed opposition now claimed by the Taliban. God is great, their fighters cry. In Kabul today, the Taliban spokesman had a message for the enemy.
We have captured Panjshir with the will of God. We are telling those people who still want to fight, if they want a normal life, they are welcome in Afghanistan, their home. But they need to stop fueling instability.
A defiant reply on social media. 32-year-old Commander Ahmed Massoud vows to continue the resistance. He says his men are still in Panjshir Valley and urges Afghans to rise up. The Taliban are getting on with the business of being in charge. This is the first visit by the UN's humanitarian chief, Martin Griffiths. He also stopped by here earlier today, a tented camp in a Kabul park. Thousands displaced by fighting in northern provinces when the Taliban advanced towards Kabul. Displacement, drought, hunger. Afghanistan was confronting a major humanitarian crisis even before the Taliban took power. Now the needs of this nation pose an urgent test for the international community and the Taliban. Shafiqa tells me she lost her husband in this war. Now she worries the Taliban won't let her work to support 4 children. What should we eat? What should we do? At Kabul airport before he left, Mr. Griffiths told us he stressed the rights of women in his talks here.
The international community needs to know that there is a genuine will on the part of the authorities to adhere to these principles, to understand them, and to learn about them over time. I've heard good words here, but none of us believe only in the value of words.
Many now wait to see what the Taliban will do. Aid agencies, allies, most of all Afghans. The first step, forming a government to start moving forward. Newsday Sept, BBC News, Kabul.
Well, earlier I spoke to Nathan Sales, who served as the former coordinator for counterterrorism at the US State Department. He gave me this assessment of the situation in Afghanistan.
I think we're seeing what is very much a fog of war situation where it's very difficult for us to figure out exactly what the circumstances are on the ground. I think going forward, we understand that Massoud has indicated a willingness to stop fighting and to join a government led by the Taliban as long as it is representative of all of Afghanistan and inclusive. I have to say, though, I am not terribly optimistic that the Taliban would be willing to share power with those who favor democracy and human rights and women's rights in particular. My fear is that the Taliban sees themselves as poised to achieve victory militarily. And in those circumstances, it doesn't seem to me that they will have much interest in negotiating away what they think that they can acquire via brute force.
So Nathan, with the picture that you've just painted, what prospects are there for people who are living in Panjshir, and if eventually they do come under Taliban rule?
Well, I think the resistance in Panjshir and elsewhere in Afghanistan is very important for the Afghan people, but it's also important for Western countries as well. These partners of ours are committed to human rights and the rule of law. They are resisting the Taliban's attempt to destroy the constitutional government of Afghanistan. And make no mistake, the odds are certainly stacked against them. But it is important, I think, for the United States and for the international community to provide them whatever support they need, starting with diplomatic support. The West should not be rushing to recognize the Taliban at a time when the Taliban is going door to door and conducting reprisals, at a time when they are saying to women in Afghanistan, stay in your houses because our fighters have not been trained how to respect women. Well, that's one way to put it.
Yeah, on that issue of Western intervention, we understand that the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Qatar for crisis talks. What are you expecting from these talks?
Well, the face that the Taliban shows in Doha is very different than the face that the Taliban shows in Afghanistan itself. We've seen over the past 2 years and even longer that the Taliban spokespersons in Doha say what Western audiences want to hear, but then those promises, those commitments, they never actually get around to implementing them on the ground. So if past pattern is any prediction of the future, I would not expect much in terms of deliverable promises from the Taliban in Doha.
That was Nathan Sales, a senior fellow with the Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative of the Atlantic Council. Meanwhile, the families of those killed by the downing of MH17 have been giving evidence for the first time at the murder trial in the Netherlands. 4 suspects, 3 Russians and 1 Ukrainian, are accused of shooting down the plane over rebel-held eastern Ukraine in 2014, killing all 298 people on board. All 4 are suspected of being key pro-Russian separatists, and none are attending the trial. Anna Halligan sent us this report.
The bereaved families want the world to know. Their scars may have healed, but the wounds remain. Ria van der Steen was the first relative to speak in the courtroom. Her father and stepmother were among those killed. She described her recurring nightmare, in which she's walking through what should have been beautiful fields of sunflowers, but they're full of wreckage and bodies. She smells fire and death and calls out, "Dad, where are you?" Her father, Jan, was eventually identified by 2 tiny fragments of bone.
And when we found each other, he was just smiling and says, "Oh, you're here." But it wasn't a nice meeting, because I had to tell him that I was looking for him because he died, because he was in the plane.
To date, this trial has been dominated by discussions about the weapon, a surface-to-air missile used to shoot the passenger jet out of the sky, and the 4 fugitive suspects. Earlier this year, the court visited the wreckage recovered from the crash site. Over the next 3 weeks, families from 8 nations will testify here. They come from Canada, the United States, the UK, Germany, Indonesia, Malaysia, Australia, and of course, the Netherlands. This time has been allocated to ensure the enormity, the gravity of their personal loss is reflected in these criminal proceedings, along with the anger and frustration among the families' remaining fears that they won't get justice and those behind the attacks will never take responsibility. A verdict is expected next year. Anna Holligan, BBC News at Schiphol Airport.
Meanwhile, aid agencies are warning that millions are facing hunger in Myanmar, with the country edging towards civil war after the military seized control in February. The World Food Programme says the number of people needing help to feed themselves could double this year. Faced with such uncertainty, many communities are relying on volunteers. Coco Ong has sent us this report.
A symbol of desperation. These flags are popping up across Myanmar. Households asking for help. A white flag is a request for food. Yellow signals a shortage of medicine. It's another sign of Myanmar's collapsing economy. Many people here have little to cook with. Simple food with some rice. The impact of the military coup, coupled with a massive wave of COVID infections, has left many families struggling.
Donors came to us yesterday. They gave us 4 kilos of rice and a crate of eggs, enough for us for 2 days or so. After that, I don't know how we'll get food. I can't sleep at night.
It's local communities that are providing much-needed handouts. Volunteers and private donors stepping in to help, since the government is doing little to provide support. Most international aid agencies haven't been operating in Myanmar since the military coup earlier this year.
Donors like us are not rich. They are ordinary people like you and me who are willing to give away half of what they have. I'll donate $3 if I have $6, for example. It's just people helping people.
In Yangon, the business capital, long queues of people waiting hours to buy food at deep discounts. Many of them are young and out of work.
Because there are no jobs, people cannot afford rentals and so on. Young people are reluctant to get donations for free.
For those who have stood for hours, their bellies may be filled today. But without greater support from the authorities and the outside world, they and families will continue to suffer. Kuku Ao, BBC News.
Well, let's take a look at some of the other stories in the headlines today. The actor Michael K. Williams has been found dead at his home in New York. He was 54. Williams was best known for playing Omar Little in all 5 series of the crime drama The Wire, but also had roles in the gangster series Boardwalk Empire and the horror drama Lovecraft Country. It's not yet known how he died. One of the great figures of French cinema, Jean-Paul Belmondo, has died at the age of 88. Belmondo began his career acting in the theatre, but shot to fame in Jean-Luc Godard's revolutionary classic Breathless and became a key figure in French New Wave cinema. President Macron described him as a national treasure. The EU is accusing Belarus of a blatant disrespect for human rights after 2 of the main opposition leaders were jailed. The European Commission called for the immediate release of Maria Kolesnikova and Maxim Znak, who were convicted of extremism and plotting to seize power. Both denied the charges but were sentenced respectively to 11 and 10 years in jail. Brazil's president has signed a decree aimed at restricting the powers of social media companies. Mr. Bolsonaro said that the new legislation would protect freedom of speech. Since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, Twitter and Facebook have deleted many posts shared by Mr. Bolsonaro and his supporters, deemed as false and misleading. Well, if you want to get in touch with me on any of the stories that you've seen so far on Newsday, the situation in Myanmar, for instance, I'm on Twitter at BBC Karishma. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. You're watching Newsday on the BBC. Still to come on the programme. With 8 weeks to go until the next crucial climate summit, we look at the challenges on the agenda.
Freedom itself was attacked this morning, and freedom will be defended. The United States will hunt down and punish those responsible.
Bishop Tutu now becomes spiritual leader of 100,000 Anglicans here, of the blacks in Soweto Township as well as the whites in their rich suburbs.
We say to you today, in a loud and a clear voice, enough of blood and tears. Enough!
The difficult decision we reached together was one that required great and exceptional courage.
It's an exodus of up to 60,000 people caused by the uneven pace of political change in Eastern Europe.
I am free!
This is Newsday on the BBC. I'm Karishma Vaswani in Singapore. Our top story. The Taliban say they've seized the Panjshir province, consolidating their control of the whole of Afghanistan. Well, let's stay with our top story now. And UNICEF has warned that 1 in 2 children in Afghanistan are at risk of severe malnutrition following the Taliban takeover. UNICEF is continuing to work on the ground to help people at risk from drought, rising food prices and scarcity, as well as the upheaval of decades of war. Eliane Luthi, who's part of the team coordinating the relief effort in Afghanistan, explained just how dire the situation there is.
Well, what I can say is that the needs of the children in Afghanistan have really never been greater. 10 million children in need of humanitarian assistance, high levels of food insecurity, of child malnutrition. We have 12 million people that are currently at crisis or emergency levels of food insecurity. And this is not something that is only linked to the current situation. This is a country that is struggling with drought, that is facing water scarcity. A harsh winter is just around the corner. There was a poor harvest. So very much a situation where families are struggling to feed their children. And the other day, our team was in a hospital in Kabul. And I can tell you that the malnutrition ward there was filled with babies, toddlers suffering from severe acute malnutrition. And some of them were so weak that they couldn't even really make eye contact with our team. So it's a dire situation. We are on the ground. We are providing nutrition services, ensuring that babies and children get their life-saving vaccines. We set up child-friendly spaces for displaced children, and we're also trucking water to the areas that are most affected by the drought. Malnutrition is a huge priority for us. We're expecting 1 million children this year alone to be suffering from severe acute malnutrition in Afghanistan. That is a life-threatening condition. As I said, we are on the ground. We have supplies. It has been extremely difficult to be bringing in some of our life-saving supplies. In fact, we have 84 containers of humanitarian assistance just waiting to reach children in need, including therapeutic milk, materials for screening malnutrition, tents and other supplies. So it has been extremely difficult to be moving in supplies. We have pre-positioned supplies in some of the key areas of the country. Malnutrition is a big issue. There's large numbers of displaced children. And some of these children have seen things that no child should see, true atrocities. So there's a very big need for psychosocial support as well. And that's why we have these child-friendly spaces that are there so that children can access a sense of childhood, speak to social workers, and be with other children. But the mental health needs are truly great as well.
Eliane Luthi there from UNICEF. Meanwhile, the UK government minister responsible for the next round of global climate talks has been meeting officials in China. Alok Sharma said he was there to discuss how to make sure the November summit in Glasgow is successful. And with just 8 weeks to go, the pressure is on. Our science editor David Shookman looks at the environmental challenges ahead for world leaders.
Year after year, the countries of the world have gathered for huge conferences on climate change. I've seen how a few have gone badly wrong, like in Copenhagen in 2009. Delegates walked out amid confusion and a lack of progress. Well, the first challenge is to make sure that there are steep and rapid cuts in emissions of the gases heating the planet, something that hasn't happened so far. Back in the early 90s, when climate negotiations started, about 35 billion tonnes of greenhouse gases were being emitted into the atmosphere every year. And since then, despite all the talking, those emissions have just kept climbing. Now, with all the plans and promises to cut them, they could fall to about 46 billion tonnes a year by 2030, but the science is incredibly clear that they need to come down far more than that if we're to have any chance of heading off the worst effects of higher temperatures, which is why this is such a crucial issue for the talks in Glasgow. Next, there's the highly sensitive question of financial help for the poorest and most vulnerable countries. Delivering this is long overdue. It's developing nations like the Philippines that are hardest hit by the violent weather made more frequent and intense by climate change. More than a decade ago, they were promised $100 billion a year. Vital, they say, to help them adapt to more dangerous conditions.
We want to see adaptation finance flowing to climate vulnerable nations that bear the brunt of extreme weather events or climate change but had no reason to cause it.
A third major challenge for Glasgow is finalising the rules for measuring and trading carbon. Previous meetings failed to reach agreement. This matters because as countries try to cut their emissions, there needs to be a way of accounting for that. Likewise, if forests are left intact and the trees keep storing carbon, that has to be recorded so the carbon credits can be traded. It's vital to sort this out.
Right now, for example, if a major company wanted to, say, invest in preserving standing forest in the Amazon, there's not yet any clarity on whether those credits that would be generated from that can be claimed by Brazil as well as by the company making that investment.
So as Glasgow prepares for thousands of delegates, there's a lot at stake. COVID makes it all more difficult, and there are just 8 weeks to get ready. David Schuckman, BBC News.
Well, I wonder how many of you will know the answer to this next question. I have to admit, I certainly didn't. What colour are the hands on the clock face of Big Ben? Surely the world's most famous timepiece. The answer isn't what you might think. After a $100 million restoration project, the hands have been returned to their original colour, as Tim Muffet reports, right on time.
Countdown to completion. One of the biggest restoration jobs ever undertaken on a landmark British building is approaching the finish line.
Good to see you, Ian.
And you.
What is it you're doing here?
We're servicing the rollers. This is one of the bits that we couldn't actually get to and service while the minute hands were on.
If you're a clock mechanic, this is like the Champions League and the World Cup rolled into one, I'd imagine, this project.
Working on this clock will be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to actually have taken it all to pieces, putting it back together again, and then carry on looking after it for a few more years. That's just going to be fantastic.
One of the most striking things you notice is the colour of the clock faces. For many years, the minute demarcations, the numbers and the clock hands were painted black. But during the refurbishment, as many layers of paint were stripped away, it became clear that they were originally this shade of blue. It's called Prussian blue, and that is what they've been repainted in.
With the clock mechanism out of action, a computerised system has meant that on special occasions, Big Ben has still been struck.
We're standing in the belfry of the Elizabeth Tower, and it was specially constructed so that the chiming bells for the 4 quarters could be heard right across London.
There's one piece of damage here that's been deliberately left alone. This crack appeared when Big Ben was struck during a test in 1858. The hammer was too heavy, but it gives the bell its unique tone.
This is London.
It should be E, the note E, but it does give it a slightly flat sound, a very serious sound, in fact.
So that's one bit of repairing you didn't want to do.
That's right, yes. No change to the bell whatsoever, because it's become the familiar note.
A much-loved building, largely hidden for the past few years, slowly revealing itself once more. Tim Muffet, BBC News.
So did you get the answer right? You'll have to tweet me at BBC Karishma to let me know. Finally, on the programme, Kim Kardashian has been criticised for promoting an untested cryptocurrency on Instagram by the head of the UK's Financial Conduct Authority. Charles Randall said Miss Kardashian had asked her 250 million followers to speculate on crypto tokens by promoting an advert for Ethereum Max. And he accused influencers of fueling the delusions of quick riches. Those are his words. The FCA chairman said Miss Kardashian's Instagram post, which he noted had been correctly flagged as an ad, may have been the financial promotion with the single biggest audience reach in history. Ethereum Max and Miss Kardashian haven't commented so far. You've been watching Newsday at this hour. A reminder of our top story. The Taliban say they're now in full control of Afghanistan after taking over the Panjshir Valley. Footage of Taliban fighters apparently raising their flag outside the provincial governor's office was posted online. That's it from us on Newsday. Thanks for joining us. I'm Karishma.